Welcome to Issues That Matter. I'm Cynthia Pooler. My guest today is Scott Ritter, and Scott and I will be discussing the Middle East and Ukraine during the second Trump administration. So, Scott, are you optimistic?
It's hard to tell. I mean, Trump has not been forthcoming as to what his specific goals and objectives are in either camp. So, observers are left, reading tea leaves, going up to empty, teacups and putting them down and looking at the leaves and saying, "Oh, I think this, I think that," which is not a way to do business. I will say that he has said some things about both topics that leave me believing that he wants to um, bring about uh, equitable conclusions to both conflicts. More so in Ukraine, less so in Gaza, but nonetheless, in Ukraine, he gave a presentation, I believe, yesterday, where he said straight up that this war was about, NATO attempting to expand into Ukraine. I got kicked off of YouTube for saying that a couple years ago, and the Ukrainians just hate that, and the Biden Blinken administration hates that. The Europeans hate that. They don't want anybody to say that because it's the truth. And
Mm.
Trump is saying it, committing to it, and that's very important because if that's the basis upon which he's moving forward to resolve this issue, it means he's already um, one step ahead of anybody else in the West because he recognizes that Russia has a legitimate grievance here. So that's very important. It also is a bad harbinger for NATO. Um, he isn't buying into the NATO narrative that NATO has a right to expand in any way it sees fit. He's saying the exact opposite, that NATO expansion is the cause of a conflict that's bad for America. And I think this is part and parcel of his overall approach towards NATO, which is one that I believe is going to result in Trump making a move to withdraw from NATO in the coming years. So there's that. On Gaza, he has built one of the most pro-Zionist. Go ahead.
Scott, I want to ask you a question. There's a lot of my friends who are of left of center persuasion. And they, even to this day, that they're belly aching over the fact that Trump won. But I don't think they fully grasp the situation that you and I have been talking about for a long time. That the Biden administration took us to the brink. They don't understand that we might be better off with Trump because he might not bring us to the brink like Biden did. What do you say to those people who are lamenting over the fact that Harris did not win?
Do you want to know what I honestly say to them, or do you
Of
want to?
course.
I say they are irrelevant as fly poop on a window. Um, they're the equivalent of a bug on my windshield. I'm in a car, I'm on a highway, I'm driving forward, I'm getting to where I'm going. You're a bug in the air, you hit my windshield, you no longer exist. That's all the relevance they have to any discussion we have. They don't matter, they're not part of the discussion. Now, as a human being and an American who believes that people are allowed to have opposite points of view and in the interest of furthering debate, dialogue, and discussion, um, I will tell them that, you know, if before they get on with Trump, I want them to go back and honestly reflect on what happened um, in the United States between September 13th and November 20th. On September 13th, I'd remind them, Joe Biden backed down from pressure from Keir Starmer to authorize or green light the use of ATACMS missiles by Ukraine on Russia. First of all, I'd like to have their opinion, their expert opinion, because clearly these are informed people. They wouldn't dare, put out an opinion on Trump unless it was grounded in a foundation of in-depth knowledge and information and understanding and comprehension about the complex issues that we face today. So they are aware of how close we came to nuclear war, right, Cynthia? They understand that? Do they know how
I
close?
understand it.
I know you do. I'm not picking on you, Cynthia. I'm talking about your friends of the left of center persuasion. They want to engage in a dialogue. They're having one. They're being critical of Trump. But before I let them even get there, they have to earn the right to do that. In order to earn the right to do that, they have to show a comprehension of the underlying issues. And the number one underlying issue is how close we came to a nuclear war because of Joe Biden, because of Tony Blinken, and because of people like this who condone that and don't hold them to account. So before they attempt to hold Trump to account, are they willing to hold Biden to account? Because once they do hold Biden to account, they'll understand that what Trump is trying to do is prevent the very nuclear war that Joe Biden and Tony Blinken almost got us involved in with Russia. Because when they greenlit the use of ATACMS missiles on Russian territory on November 19th, they brought us to the brink of nuclear war with Russia. We were that close. And I will condemn these people forever and ever for allowing this to happen. If they want to meet me and talk to me, understand I will get aggressive to them because I care about my life, the life of my family, the life of my friends, and the future that I want for my children. And I hold them accountable for facilitating this idiot, Joe Biden, who took us to the brink of nuclear war. Now they want to talk about Donald Trump. What are they upset about? That he might prevent a nuclear war? Do these people even understand where Ukraine is on a map? Can they point Ukraine out on a map? Can they tell me the difference between Poltava and Lvov, Kiev and Dnipropetrovsk? They can't even pronounce Dnipropetrovsk, let alone spell it or tell me where it is or why it's relevant. So there, I want to give them a seat at this table, Cynthia? No, I don't. They have to earn the right. They have to earn the right by actually taking the time to learn these issues. Otherwise, bug, windshield, splat. That's all they are.
Okay. Sorry, I kind of dissuaded you from your talk and go on about Ukraine.
Wait a minute. Now I got to calm down because you spun me up. No, look, nuclear war, I take it very seriously. And I get angry. I get furious at people because this is literally a life and death issue. And we're not out of the woods yet. This moron in chief right now, and he's not even held responsible because his brain literally doesn't work anymore. Tony Blinken's calling the shots on foreign policy in violation of constitutional procedure, and he's getting us to the brink of a nuclear war. They're doing everything they can to take us right up to the precipice, but fortunately, Donald Trump isn't taking the bait, and Donald Trump is again, just an astounding acknowledgement yesterday when he said that this war is because of NATO expansion into Ukraine and that that's unacceptable to Russia, and he understands that. That's that's a key to getting us out of this mess and avoiding a nuclear war. And to me, avoiding the nuclear war is more important than just about anything. I ruined my voice.
I'm sorry.
Just need to. The problem is you got me spun up early on a Friday,
I'm
and I
sorry.
hadn't exercised my vocal cords yet. No, it's not your fault. It's my fault. I shouldn't have taken the bait, but I did. I do think there's a path out, a path out of the debacle that is Ukraine today. It's going to be a path that many people won't understand. But again, I start off and this is just to be honest. I just wrote a book called Covering Ukraine. It's a book I did with Anya Kay, this podcaster from Poland. She's actually coming to the United States next week, and we're going to do a short little book tour on the East Coast. But
Good.
she, this book talks about the complexity of the Ukraine and how we got to where we are, including a big chapter on it's about NATO expansion. Um, but the contents of the book run against the grain of everything most Americans have learned about the Ukraine conflict from the mainstream media. The mainstream media has been lying to you from day one on this issue. Um, just taking the government narrative and running with it. But the fact is, America has been lied to about every aspect of this conflict, how we got where we are, what our goals and objectives are. See, many Americans think that what's going on in Ukraine is about standing up for democracy and standing up for
Right.
a little nation that's been attacked by the bigger nation. And, we must stand up and defend democracy and freedom. There's no democracy in Ukraine. There never has been democracy in Ukraine. And they certainly aren't about freedom. They're about corruption. They've been about corruption since the moment that they were created as an independent state. I say that with firsthand knowledge. I went to Kiev in 1997 as a UN inspector, trying to get the Ukrainian government to, clamp down on black marketeers who are disassembling, you know, taking apart Ukrainian defense industry and selling it on the black market to nations like Libya and Iraq. Um, and what I found is that the money that was involved in that goes into everybody's pocket, from Kuchma on down. Kuchma at that time was the president. Everybody in his National Security Council, the SBU, their KGB, everybody was making money. It is the single most corrupt nation on the planet. You can't do anything without money greasing the palms of somebody. Um, but you know, we also have to recognize that Ukraine has always been seen by the United States as a tool to bring down the Soviet Union and Russia. Ever since 1948, when the CIA started parachuting in um, Ukrainian nationalists into Ukraine to reinforce the organization of Ukrainian nationalist insurgents, Stepan Bandera's people, in their ongoing struggle against Soviet and Russian rule. The CIA has been involved in just that, facilitating the use of Ukraine to take down the Russians. We most recently saw, people talk about 2014 and the Maidan, the revolution of dignity is the absurdity that the Ukrainians, the Ukrainian nationalists and their Western supporters call. It wasn't. It was a coup d'état, a coup that began actually in 2004, 2005, when the CIA and others, George Soros, using George Soros's foundation, orchestrated what they call the Orange Revolution. The Orange Revolution overturned an election that had put Viktor Yanukovych, who is an ethnic Russian Ukrainian, in power as the presidency. They tried to overturn the election. They had a follow-on election. He won. Then they annulled that in violation of the Constitution and installed Yushchenko, who is a Ukrainian nationalist. What was the first thing Yushchenko did when he became um, the leader of Ukraine? He made Stepan Bandera a national hero. That tells you where his priorities are. He made a Nazi the national hero of Ukraine. Now, this Orange Revolution was supposed to keep these Nazis in power, but Yanukovych made a comeback in 2010. He wasn't supposed to, but he did. And this was seen as a threat by the CIA and Western intelligence services to their Ukraine plan. So 2014 was a coup to prevent Yanukovych from winning re-election and to oust him, but not just oust him, but to destroy him and his Russian constituents in eastern Ukraine as being politically viable. It was the beginning of an ethnic war of eradication, a genocide, cultural genocide against the Russians. That's what triggered this war. People don't like to talk about that. The fact that the CIA put in Western nationalists whose sole function was not only to overthrow a constitutionally mandated president, but to eliminate an entire population's political viability, to ensure that never again could the Russian speaking population of Ukraine elect a Russian sympathetic president. See, it wasn't Putin that put Yanukovych in, it was the people of Ukraine, the people of Eastern Ukraine. And so what happened after 2014 is the nationalists, backed by the United States, went to war against the people of Eastern Ukraine. That's what's really at stake here. And it's not Putin who's the aggressor, it's us who are the aggressors. And Trump finally sees that. He recognizes that. This is a huge deal because he's now starting from a foundation of fact that will allow him to come up with a reality based solution to this problem, one that Russia can accept. um, because he understands what Russia's needs and wants are. There's one thing he has to do that he hasn't done yet. He hasn't acknowledged that the policy of the United States, um, most recently articulated by Lloyd Austin when he came back from Ukraine in, I think it was May of 2022, is the strategic defeat of Russia. The strategic defeat of Russia means the total defeat of Russia, it means the collapse of Russia. It means the collapse of Russian society. For Americans to understand what that means, think about how you would feel if Russia said, we want to return America to the age of the Great Depression. You'd say, well, no, we're not going to let that happen. Well, that's what we're wanting to do to Russia, economically collapse Russia through sanctions, squeezing off, causing people to lose their jobs, causing businesses to collapse, making it impossible to sustain life. That's what we want. Now, imagine you're a Russian and you're hearing that. How happy are you going to be about that? We want the societal collapse. Again, we want societies to collapse, for instance, in Russia, like they did in the 1990s, where you don't have pensions, where you don't have health care, you don't have infrastructure. Millions of people have died. That's our vision for Russia. Now imagine being a Russian, hearing that and going, I don't think so. And we want the political collapse. We want Russia to collapse politically. We want Putin to go away, and we want to replace him with a compliant toady like Boris Yeltsin. Again, Russians who lived through the 90s know that they don't want to go back in those times. um, Trump is going to have to walk away from that because the Russians will not talk to an American president so long as the official policy of the United States remains the strategic defeat of Russia. There's no reason to talk with the Americans. They have identified themselves as an existential threat to Russia. So why negotiate with them? The United States has to end this policy of seeking the strategic defeat of Russia. And you take that combined with Trump's informed stance on the real cause of this conflict, and we have the potential for peace. So I am optimistic.
Good. So tell us a little bit about how you feel about Gaza.
There's not going to be a happy ending in Gaza. Um, that's my personal belief. I wish there was. I wish, and a happy ending would be not only an end of the conflict, but the creation of a Palestinian state. Trump, in the closing months of his administration, his first administration, implemented what were known as the Abraham Accords, a series of agreements with Gulf Arab nations that sought to normalize relations with Israel. And um, because there was the need to make a gesture towards Palestinian statehood, they talked about what a Palestinian state could look like. No Palestinian who looked at the Abraham Accord said we can agree with this. There wasn't a Palestinian state. There was a series of what we can call Bantu lands. That's a reference to the black homelands that apartheid South Africa allowed to be created to give the notion of black autonomy and independence, when in fact they were totally subordinated to white apartheid, and they did whatever white apartheid wanted them to do. That's the Israeli vision of a Palestine, is a series of little Bantu lands that will be 100% dependent upon Israel and therefore never pose a threat to Israel. Um, but even that now can't happen. Gaza is finished. I mean, I hope I'm wrong. The Hamas continues to show a tremendous amount of resilience, as do the Gazan civilians. But my concern is that this is unsustainable at this point in time. Now that the axis of resistance has collapsed, and even if Hezbollah re-engages, which they indicate they will do before this month is out because of the continued Israeli violation of the ceasefire agreement that was signed in November, Hezbollah's actions, believe, will be limited to evicting Israel from Lebanese territory as opposed to expanding the conflict into Israel. Plus, Trump has just made it clear that he doesn't want this to drag on, and he will be far more decisive in terms of supporting whatever Israel needs to do to bring an end to Hamas, and there won't be any effective counter to that. The United States will provide effective cover for Israel on the international stage, and we're going to see, the what had been a movement on the international community towards condemning Israel and isolating Israel. I think we're going to see that to start to break apart under pressure from an American government that's not afraid to flex its muscles to achieve what it wants to achieve. So I don't have optimism for Palestine, but I will say this. Trump the other day um, retweeted a statement, a video podcast of Jeffrey Sachs, the noted economist, where Sachs singled out Netanyahu and said Netanyahu was the cause of the Iraq conflict, the cause of the Syrian conflict, the cause of all these conflicts. And Trump tweeted that out, basically saying, I agree with this. And now it appears that Netanyahu is so mad he's not coming to the inauguration. Of course, the Israelis are saying he wasn't invited, but that's a whole nother thing. I mean, I think that Donald Trump gave a hint about how he felt about Netanyahu and Israel during the campaign when he said, even before the campaign, he said, look, when we talk about the Palestinian issue, crisis between the Palestinians and the Israelis, he said, it takes two to negotiate. And in my experience, one party just doesn't want to negotiate, and that's the Israelis. So I think he knows where the problem is, and he knows who the problem is. And I don't think he's going to allow himself to become a prisoner of Benjamin Netanyahu to the extent that he was in his first administration. It was Netanyahu who leaned on Trump to get him to withdraw from the Iran nuclear deal. And now Trump, I think, understands that Netanyahu's goal isn't to get a better nuclear deal. His goal is to have the Americans attack Iran on his behalf, getting us involved in a third Middle East war after Iraq and Syria. And Trump says, I'm not doing that. I'm not playing that game. So, for all the people that think that Trump is just going to be a doormat for Israel, I think they're going to be surprised. Now, if you're pro-Israeli, it will be an unpleasant surprise. If you're anti-Israel, it will be a pleasant surprise. But I think you're going to see a far more balanced approach of Donald Trump towards Israel and the Middle East than the composition of his cabinet might otherwise suggest. Otherwise, he wouldn't have tweeted that Jeffrey Sachs segment.
What do you see happening with the Palestinians?
Well, first of all, I just have a question. I mean, look, I've been very pro-Palestine in terms of the creation of a Palestinian
Right.
state. But which Palestinians are you talking about? Are you talking about the Palestinians of Gaza who are resisting Israel's occupation as part of a insurrection led by Hamas? Or are you talking about the Palestinian Authority, Mahmoud Abbas, Abu Mazen, the man who sold out the Palestinian cause to the Israelis and is using Palestinian security forces right now to crack down on anti-Israeli militants in the town of Jenin? Which Palestinians are we talking about? Are we talking about the Palestinians in diaspora who march in the streets and ask Americans to march in the streets with them, as many Americans have done in support of a free and independent Palestine, and then stab every single one of those Americans in the back by cheering on the victory of Al Qaeda in Syria because they're not pro Palestinian, they're anti Assad, it turned out. That they don't care about Palestine. When confronted, one of these so called Palestinian enthusiasts said, well, we understand now that the Palestinian state might be delayed by decades. Well, what the hell? Then you're not pro Palestine. You're letting all these people sacrifice their lives in a conflict that was supposed to lead to the creation of a Palestinian state. And you're saying, not we're willing to sacrifice that because letting Al Qaeda take over in Syria is more important to us. So, which Palestinians are we talking about? I don't mean to be too harsh, but there isn't a Palestinian singularity here. And the fact is, the Palestinians are their own worst enemies because they can't even get along together. They can't come up with a singular narrative. They don't believe in the same thing. If you have some Palestinians at diaspora willing to allow the dream of a Palestinian state to continue for 60 years unfulfilled, they're not pro Palestinian. If you have Palestinians who say, no, we're willing to subordinate ourselves completely to the Israeli occupier because they can pay us off so we live in mansions, they're not Palestinian. It turns out the only true Palestinians live in Gaza and some enclaves in the West Bank, those who are willing to stand up and fight for their freedoms. And they're not doing well right now because they've been betrayed by everybody. So it's difficult to sit here and say, what about the Palestinians? Well, if you're if you support Hamas and you support independence, it's not looking well. If you support Abu Mazen and you're corrupt, it looks great. Looks great.
Mm.
Because Abu Mazen and Fatah, his military wing, they're in a civil war against Hamas. Palestinians are secretly happy that Israel's destroying Hamas. Palestinians are happy that Israel's committing a genocide against their fellow Palestinians in Gaza because that weakens Hamas. That's how broken the Palestinian cause is. Again,
Mm.
don't ask me to go in the streets. Don't ask my daughters to go in the streets and fly your colors and demonstrate on your behalf and then praise Al Qaeda taking over in Syria. Damn you to hell for that. Al Qaeda can never be tolerated. Al Qaeda can never be supported. Al Qaeda can never be cheered on. And if you're a Palestinian or pro Palestinian living in America and you're cheering on what's going on in Syria, get the hell out of this country because you have identified yourself as an ally to a known enemy of America. But it gets complicated there, Cynthia, because if it's a known enemy, then why did we just take the $10 million bounty off of Jolani's head? Why
Mm.
is the United States meeting with this guy? See, it gets complicated here. I have been, you know, vociferous in my hatred of Al Qaeda, and yet now I'm being, what? Am I a fool? Am I a fool to say to believe the narrative that Al Qaeda is our enemy? Because oh my God, we're now treating them like they're our ally, like our co-conspirators, which it turns out they are. We have been co-conspirators with Al Qaeda and the Al Qaeda core philosophy from 1978, when Zbigniew Brzezinski whispered in Jimmy Carter's ear, we can radicalize Islam in Afghanistan. We can mobilize Saudi Arabia to come in there to create a trap for the Soviets to help bring down the Soviet Union. So we created the Mujahideen. We facilitated the rise of Osama bin Laden and his little engineering company to operate in eastern Afghanistan. And we created this monster that, yes, turned out to be a trap for the Soviet Union. But then we didn't know how to handle it right. And it grew out of control and the cancer spread. And it ended up biting us back through 9/11. But how did we respond? We responded by going to war with Al Qaeda in Afghanistan, but ignoring the fundamentalist aspect of it. If you wanted to bomb the people responsible for attacking New York City and Washington, D.C. on 9/11, you would have had to bomb certain mosques in Hamburg, Germany. That had the mosques in Hamburg, Germany had far more to do with the attack on the United States than any site in Afghanistan did. And yet we didn't do anything about Hamburg, Germany. And what we did is allowed Al Qaeda to fester until we once again made it a tool. This time we used it as a tool in Syria to bring down Bashar al Assad. And now Al Qaeda has seized control of Syria. Cynthia, we are so screwed as a nation when it comes to the Middle East because we don't know what we stand for. We we lie to our own people. We lie to everybody. Um, and so why should I get mad at these Arab Americans who cheer on Al Qaeda? Because they're simply cheering on an outcome that the United States government wants. I mean,
Mm.
it's just we don't have a moral compass anymore when it comes to the Middle East. We don't know the difference between right and wrong, good and evil. We just exist to sow chaos and anarchy, to create this confusion. And hopefully, Donald Trump will get us the hell out of there because it is a place that we're not the solution. We are the problem. When we dip our fingers into the extremely divisive waters of the Middle East, all we do is create currents that disrupt everything even further. We have to get out of there. And I think Donald Trump wants to get us out of there. So again, mildly optimistic.
Two more issues. The Panama Canal.
Panama Canal. Well, it's going to become an issue, isn't it? It shouldn't become an issue. I thought we had resolved that in 1999 when we turned it over to the control of the Panamanians. And there were certain, there is a neutrality treaty that if Panama violates the neutrality of the Panama Canal, the United States has a right to military intervene and take over. But allowing Hong Kong-based port management companies to effectively manage, port facilities associated with the Panama Canal is not a violation of neutrality. Um, I don't know what Trump thinks is going on in Panama, but it's not China occupying the Panama Canal. But Trump, I think, has made a decision that the United States is going to control the Panama Canal. I mean, what is it? 70% of all container shipping between the West Coast and the East Coast of the United States goes through that. 40% of all our shipping goes through that. 6% of the world's shipping. This is an American canal. This canal serves American economic interests. And I think, Trump is of the concern that because I think he has a very simplistic understanding of how China works, but I think he's under the impression that if a Chinese company manages a port and receives direction from the Chinese Communist Party to shut down that port, that's what's going to happen, and that would be devastating for the American economy. And so I think what he wants to do is he wants to preempt Chinese capability because he's looking at a larger economic war with China, where he's going to confront China on a number of different fronts. And what he wants to do is make sure that China doesn't have the ability to shut down the Panama Canal as a retaliatory measure. So I think it's a preemptive strike to deny a hypothetical Chinese capability. But it goes against international law. It goes against, um, you know, Panamanian sovereignty. It goes against everything. But I don't think Trump cares. And I think Trump believes he has a mandate. I don't think the American people care by and large. I mean, we have some. I mean, myself, I'll say, what about international law? But the most Americans will go, nah, it's our canal. We built it. It's. And then the argument that they make that it's essential to American economic security. That's a correct argument. But I don't think you can say that as it's currently being managed, it represents a threat to American um, national security. I just don't think enough Americans are informed about the canal sufficiently so that they will, you know, up, create opposition to what Trump wants to do. I think most Americans will end up supporting his efforts to take over the canal.
I remember there was an issue with the Panama Canal during the Carter administration, right?
Well, Carter's the one who said we need to get rid of it. That this canal, you know, it doesn't belong to America, it belongs to the people of Panama. And he was trying to right right historical wrongs and trying to simplify America's footprint. Our occupation of the Panama Canal created problems in terms of our relations with nations in the region, et cetera. So he began the process of returning the canal. It led to the 1999 treaty. But remember, between Carter's desire to turn the canal back in the 1990 treaty, there was a little thing that happened in 1989. I don't know if many Americans remember it, Operation Just Cause, um, where we invaded Panama and overthrew Noriega in a very short, violent war. And I'm thinking that Trump believes we can do that again.
Okay. Last area, Greenland.
This one's more serious than most people think. It started out as sort of a meme on the internet. Greenland. This, that, and the other thing. Um, I mean, there's two things we have to look. First of all, the issue of Greenland and American security has been around for decades. Donald Trump didn't invent this. In fact, he acknowledged that the other day when he said, "This is a problem that predates my presidency." Um, the United States has a vested strategic interest in Greenland, um, as part of a shield that helps protect America from potential nuclear attack from Russia over the Arctic Circle. Um, and the early warning stations there, the American base at Thule, are all very important. But that's Cold War era stuff. We have satellites now. We have arms control for a moment. That doesn't make that the issue that most important. The most important thing about Greenland right now is the fact that global warming has created a thawing of the ice pack. Um, And so now we are starting to see the ability of the Northwest Passage becoming a major transit of shipping. And you just draw a line at how you can get from the west coast of the United States all the way to Europe, or from the Russian ports of Murmansk all the way to Vladivostok, and um, how you shorten transit, how efficient this becomes. Who controls those sea lanes, and then take a look at a map. Using the Arctic Circle as the focal point, and see how Greenland dominates the Arctic Circle. I mean, landmass wise, and you suddenly realize, holy cow, Greenland's hugely important when it comes to the Arctic. And then we factor in that as the ice pack melts, there's territory that will be opened up for um, exploitation, mining. There's tremendous amount of resources, natural resources there, precious metals and things of that nature, rare earth minerals. And who's going to control that? Russia's made a big play for Arctic security. We are behind the effort, and I think Trump is not willing to subordinate the issue of Arctic security to Denmark, has an army of 17,000, most of whom are bogged down in Europe. They could put a few hundred guys up with dog sleds to guard the Arctic. That's not security. Canada, a dysfunctional state right now with a very small military who hasn't invested a lot in Arctic warfare. Trump saying we can do a better job, and it's imperative that we do a better job. And so he's looking to make Greenland an American concern so that America is responsible for the security and can project American dominance over the Arctic Circle in an effort to control global economy. Again, I talked about some of the things that Trump is going to be doing in terms of shutting China down. China, of course, has talked about building an Arctic Silk Road. China wants to project itself up into the Arctic region, and one of the areas that they were flirting with was Greenland. Um, China went in and made a bid in 2020 on some mining, camps in Greenland, and around 2022, uh, the viability of these began to falter. But that doesn't mean that China has lost interest. And what Trump's trying to do is just eliminate any possibility whatsoever that China can use Greenland as a springboard into the Arctic. And the best way to guarantee that doesn't happen is for the United States to take control of Greenland. So again, what started off as a meme turns out that there's actually some real legitimate reasons behind Trump's concerns. The big problem is that Greenland belongs to Denmark, and Denmark is a NATO ally. And what's interesting now is what's happened here, where you have the real potential. You have the United States talking about militarily invading and occupying a NATO ally. And you have Europe right now freaking out. You have France saying this would be an act of war, and that Europe must prepare for a war with the United States. I mean, this is where we're going on. Of course, Europe will never fight a war with us. Europe can't fight a war with us, and Trump will be more than happy to destroy the European economy in retaliation if they want to do so. Um, but it's interesting to show you how little concern Trump has about Europe and about NATO. When I tell people that Trump's going to unplug from NATO that quick, they're like, "No, he never will. He can't." The proof is in everything he said and what he's doing in Greenland, and the total disregard he has for NATO, Article 5, Denmark, and all that. I think just proves that he's going to unplug from NATO quicker than you can blink an eye.
So would you say the next 4 years are going to be very interesting?
I would say that you and I have job security for the next 4 years, Cynthia, that there's going to be plenty of opportunity for us to come on here and pontificate about, you know, the situation world. And I also believe that Trump will do his best to avoid a nuclear conflict so that, we our job security is secure. I'm concerned that if, I've always said that if Kamala Harris were elected, that we'd be in a nuclear war within 6 months to a year. And I'm convinced that that is true because she'd continue this insane Biden policy. But I do think it's not going to be a smooth ride. There's no guarantee of success. There's going to be a lot of bumps and turns. But the next 4 years is going to be one hell of a ride, though. It's going to be one of those roller coaster rides that you scream the entire time, you pee your pants, you throw up. But when you get to the bottom, you go, oh, let's do that again.
Well, we have 1 week to go before the Biden administration ends, right? And a
Yep, one
week
week for him to cause trouble.
and a week is a long time in politics.
Yep. I do think though that Trump has been very good at nullifying things. Plus, the Biden administration is has its attention diverted. I mean, there's this horrible tragedy taking place in Los Angeles right now,
Right.
the fires, um, and the Biden administration can't even control the narrative coming out of the Ramstein group that's meeting right as we speak in Germany about provision of aid. Depression has dominated the air because they understand what's happening. This is the last real meeting of this. This is the last time they're going to get together and talk about, the United States and Europe working together to help Ukraine in the future. This meeting may not even ever happen again. So, well, I don't think the Biden administration is going to be able to end the world. But I will remind people of this: the George Herbert Walker Bush hated Bill Clinton, hated him, and was so frustrated with the fact that the Clintons were talking about reversing the Bush era policy of sanctioning Saddam and stuff in the aftermath of the Gulf War. Clinton was talking about um, wanting to, hell, I had Iraqis tell me that the Clinton administration sent people to Jordan to meet with Iraqis about opening up Iraqi oil exploration to the United States to get sanctions lifted, to end this whole charade of weapons inspectors. Um, what did the George H.W. Bush administration do on the day that Clinton was inaugurated? They bombed Iraq. They took the
Okay.
United States to a war footing with Iraq as Clinton was being sworn in. And so I think watch the last day of Biden administration. I think you're going to see some tomfoolery take place in terms of aggressions, in terms of provocations, et cetera, so that the first day of Trump's office is going to be about resolving a crisis that it was inherited from the Biden administration, and not so much about looking to implement some of the things he's talked about. I don't trust the Biden administration as far as I can throw them.
So what's on the agenda for Scott Ritter in 2025?
Well, as I said, I'm going to start the year by we got this book this book tour here. Anya Kay's coming in the 15th. I'm doing an event in Queens, a dinner event. A ticketed event, but you get a dinner, you get a book, and you get Anya Kay and I talking about the war in Ukraine. On the 19th, we'll be at Busboys and Poets in Washington, D.C., doing an event. No tickets there, open to the public. And on the 21st, we'll be returning to Farmers and Chefs in Poughkeepsie, New York, upstate New York, where we had a fantastic event on with Disarm at the Time of Perestroika. We're going to try and repeat that again. A ticketed event. You get a wonderful dinner, the book, conversation, etc. And that's keeps with the theme of continuing to view my work as dedicated to empowering people with knowledge and information. But now the question is, what are the topics that I'm going to focus on? I'm afraid that a lot of my efforts are going to be dominated by people like you who are going to be asking me questions about various things around the world, which is fine. Uh, but I am going to try and focus on two major tasks in 2025. The first is continuing to push to not just prevent nuclear war, but to promote arms control. I'm going to make the promotion of arms control a centerpiece of the work that I'm trying to do. We have a year between the time Trump is sworn in and 2026 to save the New START treaty. Um, and if Trump doesn't want to you know, embrace that treaty wholeheartedly, at least extend it while he engages in good faith negotiations with the Russians about a follow on treaty. But we need to preserve the framework of arms control because without that, we get into an arms race that neither side can afford and it'll become a very dangerous thing. There's no sense in trying to create stability in Europe by ending the conflict in Ukraine and then not do anything about the threat of nuclear war. So that's going to be it. And then in a supporting operation to that, because in order to move forward with arms control and such, we have to re-educate the American people not only about the danger of nuclear war, but the fact that Russia is not a threat worthy of building up this nuclear arsenal. That we don't need to be adversarial. We don't need to be enemies with Russia, but we are infected collectively with Russophobia. And I plan on getting my passport back and resuming my travels to to Russia to continue the work that was begun in 2023 and 2024. And
Hey, so you still haven't gotten your passport?
I still have. It's even more funny now. The Department of Homeland Security has said they they have no record of my passport being seized.
Oh,
They're pretending it never happened. And so now I have to file a petition for remission or mitigation of forfeiture and penalties uh, to get them to investigate as the first step of an ongoing process to get them to return my passport. But now they're just saying, no, we never took your passport. We don't know anything about that. We don't have any records. They never gave me a receipt. They just took my passport and that was it. Now they're pretending they never took it. So we live in funny times. They really don't want me to travel. I tell you that.
wow. So when you do get your passport back, are you going to resume the movie that you were working on?
Yes. No, that's going to be part of the movie and a related book, Waging Peace, will be resumed. It's a timeless topic. It's an important topic. Um, and yes, we will move forward with that project. There's some things that I have to clarify. One of them is that the host uh, that brought me to Russia the first two times, Alexander Zuryanov, he's still in prison. He was arrested on trumped up, corruption charges by a corrupt Novosibirsk political elite, um, and he remains in prison. They had to drop the original charges because there's nothing to them, but they've created new charges just to keep him in prison because they're trying to break him, get him to plead guilty. This is a standard tactic that happens throughout Novosibirsk and maybe elsewhere in Russia, where they arrest you, they throw a bunch of charges at you, and they get you to plead guilty and to a lesser charge so that you destroy your political viability. Alexander is a very strong man. He will not plead guilty, but he's been in jail since June 3rd under some very difficult conditions. And he was supposed to be a star of this movie. This Waging Peace project was, about he and I collaborating on this. And it's hard to make a movie when your co-star is in prison. So that issue's got to be resolved.
So he was thrown in prison the day that they seized your passport at Kennedy, correct?
Are you trying to make 2 + 2 = 4 there, Cynthia?
Yes, I
Are you
am.
trying to do that? There's a lot of people that believe that, and I'm increasingly moving in that direction. There's, I have to be careful what I say because he's still in prison, and therefore the people that mean him harm are so. I will just say that there's a reason to believe that there's a relationship between
Okay.
what happened there and what happened to him, what happened, my seizure of my passport, and what happened to him.
Okay. I'm gonna
It
I'm
has
gonna
nothing to do with corruption.
I'm
So,
gonna do a plug for myself.
okay, please.
You and I get great great views. I'm creating a holiday.
Ooh,
I'm creating a holiday called National Candidate Recognition Day. Candidates, after they run, if they don't win, they're forgotten the next day. So I want to keep their spirit alive, candidates throughout the country, and candidates are more or less like we saw with Camilla Harris. She was chosen by the elite. She wasn't, and then she was thrown to the public, and the public said, "Here, this is your candidate." She was selected, not elected. So I wonder how many other candidates in the country for lesser office are in the same boat. So I'm going to hold up my sign. And if anybody out there is a candidate who would like to join my Facebook group and help me plan August 2nd, National Candidate Recognition Day, I would love to have you on board. So here's my sign.
No, it's out of focus. You got to get it closer or pull it back. I can't read it. Pull it back further. Now lift it up a little higher. Ah, there's a problem with your camera because it's all blurred out. Can you take
Oh,
a JPEG? Can you take a photograph of it and insert it as a you know
I'll be mentioning it in subsequent.
send it take a picture of it and send it to me and I'll put it out on my Twitter and all that to help promote
Okay, great. That sounds good.
it. Okay.
Okay, so Scott, it's been a pleasure talking with you in the new year. Thank you, everybody, for listening. And buckle your seatbelts because next week there's going to be a brand new administration in Washington.
New
Thanks,
sheriff.
thanks, Scott. You have a wonderful day, and thank you, everybody, for listening. Uh, Take care.